very good evening, community. Welcome to a new session of those horror stories that we know you like so much. Don't forget to subscribe, give us your valuable like, and activate the campaign so you don't miss the next cabinet of horror story. The turn of silence. I never thought working nights in an office could turn into something terrifying. It was a quiet job, filing documents, updating databases, and above all, enjoying the silence. But that silence, that night, it stopped being my ally. It all started around midnight. The office was empty as always. Just me, the cold neon lights, and the constant hum of the computers. I was reviewing some reports when I heard the sound. A sharp thud, as if someone had dropped a book in the hallway. I thought it was my imagination. Who would be there? The last person to leave had been the boss, and that was hours ago. I stopped typing and sat still, waiting for the sound to repeat itself. Nothing happened. I sighed in relief and went back to my work. But then I saw it in the corner of my monitor, reflected in the dark screen. A shadow appeared that moved quickly down the hallway. I froze. It must be some trick of the light, I told myself. Although my heart began to beat faster, I turned slowly to look, and there was no one. Just the empty hallway and the glass doors of the closed offices. I returned to the monitor, trying to ignore the discomfort. But just as I was starting to calm down, the sound returned. This time, it was footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I worked up the courage and got up. I took the flashlight we had for emergencies and walked into the hallway. Hello, I called, trying to sound firm. My voice was lost in the echo. I walked to the end of the hallway and checked each office. They were all empty. There was no one, not a shadow out of place. I returned to my desk, determined to finish the shift as soon as possible. But when I sat down, I noticed that something had changed. The documents I had been reviewing were scattered on the floor. Now I really felt the cold creep up my spine. I started to pick them up quickly, but then the lights began to flicker. Once, twice, 3 times, until everything was in complete darkness. I remained motionless, with the flashlight as my only refuge. It was then that I heard a whisper. It came from nearby, too close. "You're not alone." I spun around, pointing the light everywhere, but there was no one. The whisper returned, this time clearer. It was a woman's voice, soft but full of a kind of mockery. "I see you," she said, drawing out the words. Panic overwhelmed me. I ran towards the front door, but no matter how hard I pulled, the lock wouldn't budge. I tried to scream, but my voice was barely a thread. Then, in the reflection of the door glass, I saw her. She was a blurry figure, with eyes that glowed as if they were on fire. She was behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing. All that remained was the echo of a low, distant laugh, which faded out with the last flicker of the lights. When my coworkers finally arrived at dawn, I was still sitting on the floor, clutching the flashlight as if my life depended on it. I tried to explain what happened. But no one believed me. They reviewed the security cameras and, according to them, I was the only one there that night. But I know what I saw, and ever since then, there's not a night that goes by that I don't think about the shadow, the footsteps, the whisper, and that laugh that still haunts me. The call I work as a night watchman in an old office building. One of those structures that smell of dampness and years of forgotten stories. I don't know if people realize it, but there's something strange about old buildings. It's like each brick has a story to tell, something that was never forgotten, and that waits to be heard. At first, I didn't mind working nights. Everything was quiet, just the glow of the computer screen and the distant sound of the coffee machine accompanied my solitary hours. But everything changed one night, a few months ago. It was an ordinary night. At least that's what I thought. As always, I stayed late, reviewing the security logs, listening to the distant hum of the old fans. Suddenly, the landline phone, the one that's always silent, rang. It was strange, because there were no calls during the early morning hours. I wasn't expecting visitors, nor alarms that could be activated. The first thing that came to mind was a system error, but something inside me told me that wasn't the case. It wasn't a normal call. "Hello?" I answered, my voice a little tired. Silence. There was nothing on the other end, just the white noise of the phone. I hung up quickly, thinking that maybe it was a bad connection or some line error. However, before I could return to my work, the phone rang again. "Hello?" I insisted, a little firmer this time. No, what came through on the other end wasn't silence. It was a whisper, a murmur so low that I could barely make it out. Something in my stomach twisted. My mind began to look for excuses. Maybe the wind or some interference on the line. But the whisper didn't stop, and what it said chilled me to the bone. "Go. Go now." My hands trembled at hearing those words. I looked around, as if something in the darkness could jump out at me at any moment. The room was empty, the hallway dark, but that whisper seemed to come from everywhere at once. I decided to hang up immediately, but this time, something made me keep looking at the phone for a few more seconds before returning to the computer. Something inside me told me something was wrong. The cold on my back wouldn't go away. And then, just when I thought it was all over, the phone rang again. One more time. "Don't go. Don't go." I got up, my hair standing on end, and went to check the security system. There was nothing. The building was completely empty. The camera showed nothing but dark corridors and empty offices. But something inside me compelled me to do something I would normally never do. I decided to go to the top floor. I don't know why I did it. Maybe the call, that strange whisper, had pushed me into something I didn't fully understand. I went up the stairs, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the crumbling walls. When I reached the top floor, the door was ajar. I pushed it slowly and entered. What I saw made me jump back. A figure was there, standing in front of one of the windows, looking out at the city. It was a woman, or what was left of her. Her body was thin, almost skeletal, and her skin, it wasn't human. It was pale, but with a grayish tinge, almost translucent. Her face was turned towards me, but she didn't seem to have eyes. Just two dark holes that stared at me fixedly, as if they could see through me. I couldn't move. I was frozen. And then, the worst thing happened. The figure smiled. Her mouth opened in a smile so wide it seemed impossible, as if she could swallow everything that was around her. "I told you not to go." My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I could only take a step back. And when I did, the figure approached slowly, as if she were in no hurry, as if all she wanted was to make sure I saw her clearly. Suddenly, the phone rang again in my pocket. I woke up hours later, sweating, with a dry mouth, in the same office chair. Everything was in its place, as if nothing had happened. Was it all a dream? I don't know. But every time I close my eyes, I hear that whisper every time the phone rings in the office. I feel the same fear, because I know something is waiting for me, something that never left. The worst part is, in the following nights, the phone keeps ringing, and each time, that voice whispers closer. The clock that never ticked. I always hated night shifts, but I needed the money. I was the security guard at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a huge place full of endless shelves and dark corners that never seemed to end. My only company was an old wall clock hanging in the surveillance room, whose ticking marked the rhythm of the long hours. Everything was calm, as usual. At 2:17 in the morning, while checking the cameras, I noticed something strange. One of the boxes in aisle C was open. It was odd because, according to the inventory, that aisle hadn't been touched in weeks. I thought maybe the employees left it that way by mistake, but I had to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the spot. The warehouse was cold, much colder than usual. I walked slowly between the shelves until I reached aisle C. There it was, an open, empty box. The strange thing was that there were no signs of anything having been stolen. It was just a soft noise, like a distant murmur. I thought it was the wind, but this sound seemed to have words. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I felt it directly on the back of my neck. I turned around quickly, shining the flashlight, but there was no one. Just shelves and shadows that seemed to move at the edges of my vision. I tried to convince myself that it was paranoia from being tired. I returned to the surveillance room. I looked at the wall clock. It was still showing 2:17. I frowned and checked my phone. It was 3:02. Damn old clock, I thought, and ignored it. But we went on, Dad. But when I checked the cameras, I noticed something that made my heart stop. On the monitor, I was still in aisle C. Looking at the open box, I felt a chill run through my body. How could that be possible if I was sitting there, looking at the screen? I tried to calm down and went to the controls to restart the cameras. But just as my hand touched the keyboard, the ticking of the clock stopped. The silence was deafening. I couldn't move. That's when I heard it. The crunch of footsteps approaching down the hallway towards the surveillance room. The door behind me was ajar. I slowly turned my head and saw a tall shadow that stopped right in the doorway. It had no face, just a dark, elongated silhouette that seemed to absorb the little light in the room. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat. The figure leaned forward, and although it had no eyes, I could feel its gaze piercing me. "You shouldn't have looked at the cameras," it whispered in a voice that didn't seem human, as if thousands of voices were speaking at the same time. I backed up, tripping over the chair, but when I fell to the ground and looked again, the figure had vanished. I got up as best I could and ran out of the warehouse. In my flight, I noticed that the wall clock had fallen to the floor, and its glass was shattered. But before leaving completely, I dared to look one last time. On the surveillance room monitor, I could still see myself there, in aisle C, looking at that open box. I quit the next day. I never went back to that place. But every night at 2:17, I wake up unable to breathe, feeling something watching me from the darkness of my room, the forgotten basement. I work as a maintenance worker in an old hospital that has been in operation for decades. During the day, the place looks like what it is: a medical center full of activity, noise, and the coming and going of patients. But at night, when the corridors are silent and the lights flicker due to lack of maintenance, It's a different story. I don't know who designed this hospital, but it has a basement that almost no one goes down to. It's been closed for years, and nobody talks much about it. All I know is that I had to go there once, and I never want to go back. It all started with a simple order to check a generator that, according to the blueprints, was in the basement. They gave me a flashlight and a set of keys. No one explained anything to me, not even why that place was closed. When I asked, the answer was vague. It's an old area, but we still need the generator. Just do it quickly and come back. The elevator didn't reach the basement. I had to go down a rusty metal staircase whose steps creaked with each step. The air felt heavy, laden with moisture and something else. Something I couldn't identify. Like a sweet and rotten smell. When I got down there, I realized that the place was huge, much bigger than I imagined. The walls were peeling, the pipes were dripping, and the echo of my footsteps resounded in an unsettling way. The flashlight illuminated only a few feet in front of me, but it was enough to notice that there were old, abandoned operating rooms, rusty stretchers, and boxes with files that seemed to have been forgotten decades ago. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, even though I knew I was alone, or so I thought. While I was looking for the generator, I heard a noise. Something fell to the ground, a sharp thud that echoed down the corridor. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding like a drum. I looked in all directions but saw nothing. I decided to keep going, repeating to myself that it would be some object that fell due to the wind or a rat. But then, I heard footsteps. They weren't mine. They were behind me. Slow, heavy. I turned the flashlight quickly, but there was no one. The darkness seemed to mock me, swallowing up any possibility of seeing beyond a few meters. It's your imagination, I told myself, squeezing the flashlight tightly. But the footsteps continued. Now they were faster, closer. I ran. I didn't know where to, but I ran. My footsteps echoed, mixing with the echo of those other footsteps. I turned a corner, and as I turned the corner, I saw it. There was a figure at the end of the corridor. It wasn't human. Its shape was twisted, with elongated limbs that arched at impossible angles. Its skin was dark, like it was burned, and its eyes glowed a yellow hue, like burning embers. It stood motionless, staring at me. For a second, I thought it hadn't seen me, but then it moved its head, slowly, as if it were studying. I felt an icy chill run through my body, and then, without warning, it ran towards me. I don't remember how I got out of the basement. My mind goes blank at that point. All I know is that I reached the main floor, gasping for breath, with the flashlight still in my hand and the keys dropped somewhere. When I told what I saw, no one believed me. The basement has been closed for years, they said. There's nothing there. However, I know what I saw. And the worst part is that I'm not sure that things stayed in the basement. Since that night, every time I'm in dark corridor, I feel those yellow eyes watching me. Sometimes, when the hospital is quiet, I think I can hear footsteps behind me. The black notebook, it was a normal day at the office. Or at least that's what I thought at first. I work in accounting, reviewing numbers and invoices in a small family business. My desk is right next to the general archive, an old, creaky piece of furniture that has held papers for decades. That morning, while looking for a contract, I noticed something that shouldn't have been there. A black notebook, old and with worn corners. It had no name or logo, just a leather cover that seemed to have passed through many hands. Curious, I opened it. The first page was blank, but on the second, There was a name written in red ink. Raul Perez. Raul was the accountant who worked in my position before I came. The story goes that one day he simply stopped coming, without saying goodbye or leaving a trace. I thought the notebook might be his, so I kept looking. On the next page, there were numbers written in a disorderly fashion, as if someone had jotted them down in a hurry. But those numbers made no sense. 48.12, 3.6, 21, 44. And at the bottom, some scribbled words. Don't look too long. I felt a shiver, but I ignored it. I thought it might be some kind of joke or the delirium of an old employee. I put the notebook aside and returned to my work. However, something strange started to happen. Every time I looked up, the notebook was closer. First in the corner of my desk, then next to my keyboard. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but after a while, I couldn't concentrate anymore. I opened it again. This time, the pages were full of names, many names. Some were familiar, those of coworkers, even mine. But what really chilled me to the bone was the last entry, 1345, archive room. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 1344. The archive was right behind me. I heard a slight noise, as if someone was moving papers. I turned slowly, but there was no one. However, one of the drawers was open. As I approached, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. My own photograph. It was recent, from that same morning. It was carefully cut out and had my name written on the back, in the same red ink as the notebook. Panic paralyzed me. At that moment, I heard a whisper, so low that I almost thought I imagined it. Your turn. I don't remember how I got to the office door, but I ran as if my life depended on it. I left my computer on, my things scattered, and the notebook open on the desk. I never went back to that job, but weeks later, someone from HR called me. They wanted to know if I had left a black notebook. They say it now has a new name written in it. The name of the person who took my place. Don't forget to subscribe. Give us your valuable like and activate the campaign so you don't miss the next cabinet of horror story.